presenteeism, or people who are at work physically, but not necessarily there in mind and spirit. They're turning up so they don't lose their job, but in terms of the work that they're creating and the actual volume and quality of their work is average.
What's the impact?
Depends on the headcount in the organisation, but you're talking hundreds of dollars per head per year, potentially. And if you look at some of the surveys that Southern Cross has done, and they take a sample of companies in New Zealand and sort of extrapolate that out across the country, it's into the billions of dollars.
In New Zealand?
Yeah, and unfortunately that number's getting worse, not better. A lot of that is down to stress.
So what's the answer to that? What's the solution?
Engagement first. And I think once you get that engagement, people are more receptive.
What does education look like?
It can be...
Richard Ellis is a personal trainer,
health, mindset and nutrition coach.
He's specialisee in burnout and restoring energy and vitality back into life.
Helping high-level executives and teams in New Zealand.
When it comes to men's health, do you see that men are active?
Not enough. I don't think men are quite as good as their female counterparts.
What are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
The best thing that you can do is...
Why do we get 3 o'clock lull?
There's a couple of different components to it. One is...
You know, you talk a lot about burnout. You've had that happen to you.
Yeah. And I was my own worst coach. It was quite a wake-up call. It's something that creeps. It's not something that just happens one day and you go, oh, I'm not feeling as energetic as I was the day before. This is quite a big mindset shift, is always keep something in the tank. One of the examples that runners use is when they're running a race, they know the distance that they're looking for. The advice is always keep 10% in the tank.
That's quite the opposite of what we hear people say. What are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
Best thing that you can do is get out into daylight. It helps to get rid of that sleepiness. You know, when sometimes you wake up and you stay indoors, you can sort of still feel a little bit sleepy mid-morning because you haven't got that natural light into the eyes. So,
what about the simple way to stabilize your blood sugars and you're having constant energy throughout the day?
That doesn't mean you have to have breakfast. When I say beginning of the day is whenever your first meal is.
Is it okay not to eat breakfast?
Yep, absolutely. The cereal companies would disagree, but they're the ones that put the message out there that we all need to eat breakfast. Is getting that a consistent level of...
Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. I would love to start by asking, what is your mission in this world?
I think my mission is to help people find their own version of health, whatever that means for them. It's different for everybody. So my version isn't necessarily going to be the right thing for everybody that I come into contact with. But I think as long as I can share something that resonates with them, that they can cling on to and follow that and pull that thread, then I feel like I'll have done my mission. Yeah.
Why? Why do you even care about that?
Great question. And I don't know whether there's a clear answer to that, but I think subconsciously health has always been important to me. And I think I had fairly active parents, particularly my father. He was always very active. And I think that rubbed off on me and my brother. And rubbed off in a way that we weren't necessarily aware of until later in life, potentially. I was never a sporty kid. I did sport, but I was never any good. Never, the one thing I could do well is throw a cricket ball and sprint. Those were the two things that I actually did achieve something in. Yeah. And the other stuff was very much an also ran. But enjoyed the activity of moving and movement. And I think that sort of runs through the theme of my life, is that I've always either been a gym member or done something that's kept me moving, kept me active, and then moved into it in a career, if you like, sort of halfway through my life, did a career swerve and just followed that passion. Yeah.
What was that career swerve?
So I've got a retail background stemming back to the UK. That brought me here to New Zealand. And in my early to mid 30s, decided that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I think at that point, my values sort of came to the surface, and I had a bit of time to reflect and realize that was something that was important to me. And so followed that path, did a course in personal training, and just did it for my own personal benefit. What can I get out of this? What don't I know? And by the end of it was, I need to do this. This is something I want to keep keep doing and turn into a career and keep working at.
And so fast forward till now, what do you do now?
So I'm an evolved version of that same trainer, I think, in terms of the learning that I've done since that point has become very much more holistic. I got onto a learning journey with a couple of mentors back in 2014 and really haven't stopped formally learning with them, or at least one of them since then. So it's been a long journey, and as a result of that, I health coach now. I mindset coach and work with organizations to help them improve the overall health of the organization, the individuals in the organization, and the benefit that brings to the bottom line as a result of things like reduced absenteeism.
So this is quite fascinating because I've known so many business coaches, personal coaches, life coaches, but not a lot of health coaches, especially people like yourself who've clearly saw a gap in the market where you go in and you invest yourself, and the companies or the organizations invest in you to help make a huge change in that organization. Can you tell me how is it actually helping organizations? That's such, like, as you were saying, the bottom line. How is that working? Quick one. Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. A lot of people who come and watch this podcast or listen to the podcast are not subscribers. And so we're trying to increase our subscriber base. We are wanting to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Are you able to help us? I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better, and we're going to get more guests and better guests. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode.
Essentially, it becomes an expense saving exercise. In other words, there is less money falling out of the bottom of the organization that could be taken for granted. Oh, this is the cost of doing business.
How much are we talking about here? What's the impact?
Depends on the head count in the organization, but you're talking hundreds of dollars per head per year, potentially. And if you look at some of the surveys that Southern Cross has done, they're very, very good at doing business surveys and asking all the right questions. And they take a sample of companies in New Zealand and sort of extrapolate that out across the country. And it's into the billions of dollars. And unfortunately, that number's getting worse, not better. The trend is getting worse, and a lot of that is down to stress and the impact stress has, and the fact that we carry it with us as soon as we, when we leave work, it doesn't stay inside the building. And so when organizations address that through people like myself, they equip themselves with tools and tips that allow them to find ways to manage that stress, and that's one component. There are lots of others as well. And as a result of that, they become less tired, more productive, more cooperative, better thinkers, more creative, more productive. I think I've said that twice. So
that's okay.
But incrementally over time, that investment starts to pay off. And so those people become better versions of themselves, and the organization benefits by the fact that everybody is experiencing that.
Can you paint me a picture of the problem? What are we talking about here? What are you coming into the workplace and noticing when you are coaching people, when you're going into those organizations? What are you seeing on the ground that is a disaster? Talking about the billions of dollars being lost. What's really like? Paint a picture of the problem for us.
Some of it's unseen. So one of the phrases that's often used is presenteeism, or people who are at work physically, but not necessarily there in mind and spirit. So they're turning up so they don't lose their job. But in terms of the work that they're creating and the actual volume and quality of their work is average. So that's the unseen part of it. Oh, they're here, they're doing the job. And people will walk past and not dig any deeper. So my job is to dig a little bit deeper, through surveying at the beginning, very much a data collection exercise. And then as we progress, more and more workshops, combined with coaching, and the coaching component is there to embed the learning from the workshops, but also ask a few probing questions. This is where the health coaching component comes in, and hopefully building that rapport with people so that they feel trust is there for them to be able to share some of the challenges that they have at work.
The question I was thinking about now is, do organizations become aware? Are they aware that their staff are suboptimal? And do they know that they're suboptimal?
Yes and no, I suspect.
How do they know
Some
that?
will, some won't.
Yeah. How do
Yeah.
they know they are?
It's about how good the leadership is. I think it comes back to how in touch that leadership is with the organisation. I suspect that the senior leaders who have contact with the next layer of management down, the middle managers, would see issues if they existed in that level of the organisation. But when you're talking about the people that report to the middle managers, then that may get lost from a senior management visibility point of view.
In terms of, you talk a lot about burnout. You've had that happen to you.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's not nice, and it's something that creeps. It's not something that just happens one day and you go, oh, I'm not feeling as energetic as I was the day before. It's a slow creep, and it wasn't until I got to the point where I was working with my mentors that I talked about 2014, 2015. We did some analysis, and part of the benefit of that process was doing some testing on cortisol, which is a hormone which some people have heard can be a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. It's a natural hormone in our body that has a very important function. But an unhealthy cortisol pattern is one of the indicators that somebody's in burnout. So we should have high levels in the morning. It's what gets us out of bed, gives us the energy to go to work and do a good day's work. If somebody has burnt themselves out because they've been pushing and not giving themselves the rest and the recuperation that they need, then slowly but surely those cortisol patterns will change. And what generally happens is that the pushing elevates the cortisol level. It gives us the energy we need because we're saying, look, I need more. So it gives us more. But that is unsustainable. And eventually our body there's a feedback loop in our system. So our system says, we're noticing cortisol levels are a little bit high. We're just going to turn down the production a little bit, just like a factory would. They wouldn't overproduce products if they weren't selling those products, right? So the production gets turned down. Then when we realize that we're in a state of burnout, we back off and find ways of healing ourselves. But then, of course, we get to the state where we've started to regain healthy patterns, but the mechanism for making that cortisol is still down-regulated. So then we're in a state where we don't have enough to create the energy that we need to get out of bed in the morning. And so then that's when we're in that stage, sort of stage 3, stage 4 of burnout, where that can be really challenging. And to come back to recover that pattern to a healthy routine again is tough, is challenging, and not one I would recommend to people. And it's something that I coach people on to help them through that challenge, whether they're healthy or whether they're elevated or whether they're flatline.
What did it look like for you when you were burnout?
Flatline. So if you imagine an XY graph, so 6 a.m. being bottom right and 6 p.m. being halfway across, and then the next 6 a.m. being at the far end, it should go very, very quickly. It should go up. And then by about midday, it should start to trickle down like a slide in a kid's playground, because then that helps us sleep at night time because it's coming down. That drops down, melatonin kicks in, we fall asleep, have a good night's sleep. A disrupted pattern will probably have a higher top of the slide, and it probably won't drop down low enough to help us sleep at night time, so it will disrupt our sleep. Mine was just off the horizontal axis, and then it just did that until the end of the day. So it was almost unreadable. So there's a certain amount we should have in our system every day, and mine was about 10% of where it should have been, 20% of where it should have been. So I just wasn't making enough to give myself the energy I needed. So it was quite a wake-up call.
Why do you think it happened in the first place?
Partly personality and drive, and wanting to prove myself. So a makeup of different things. It was a combination of pushing from a training point of view. In other words, I was doing lots of different things, competing in lots of different events. And at the same time, I was working really hard and doing crazy hours. And the two just did not go together. There was no downtime. There was no quality recuperation and recovery. And I was my own worst coach.
I mean, looking back, how would you have done it differently?
Looking back, I would have done a lot less events. So I would have spread those out instead of trying to do 3 big things in 12 months. I would have done one thing in 12 months. And then I would have looked at my calendar and gone, why are you starting at 6 a.m. and finishing at 7 p.m.? And obviously there would have been breaks during the day, but it's still a long day in a fairly physical role. And I just thought I was bulletproof. I wasn't. So yeah, those are the things I would do is be a bit smarter about what sort of activities I'm doing. And I would look at my working day and go, is that realistic? Is that sustainable?
With mindset, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in your own mindset, in your own career, and how did you overcome it?
I think changing that mindset to help myself recover was difficult. I ended up joining a local yoga class, which I'd never done yoga. My mother was a yoga teacher, and I never got into it. But I knew I needed to do something that was movement-based, so I was moving my body, but in a very gentle, restorative way. So one of the nicknames for that is working in, as opposed to working out. We all know what working out is. Working in is the opposite. So working in is movement that gives energy back to the body. So it's very low intensity. The test would be you can do it while having a conversation or on a full stomach, and you're not going to have any discomfort as a result of that. And so that was sort of my road to recovery, if you like, was getting my head around the fact that I needed to do that as opposed to what I was doing so that I could get to the place where my energy was restored and back to normal.
Because you talk a lot about health restoration, or restoring energy and vitality back into your life. So do you have a vital life? Do you have vitality? Is your energy restored?
It is now. It is now. Yeah. But one of the lessons that I had to bring with me from that recovery was, how do I make sure I don't go back there again? And part of that was, and this is quite a big mindset shift, is always keep something in the tank. So one of the examples that runners use is when they're running a race, they know the distance that they're looking for, and the advice is always keep 10% in the tank. So 10% for something that you're not expecting or a fast finish. And so the fast finish means, you might sprint the last 2 kilometers or whatever it is, or you have a detour, and that detour means you need to use up that 10%. So I tried to incorporate that into all the other things that I was doing. What can I keep in the tank? How can I look after that 10% so that it's always there? I've always got a reserve.
What does it look like? What's a 10% in real terms?
Great question. So if you think about it from a weightlifting point of view, if you're bench pressing a heavy bar and you're aiming for 12 repetitions, you would do 10. So even if you were capable of 12 and you had the strength and the endurance to get to 12, you would still stop at 10. So you would go.
So that's quite the opposite of what we hear people say, that, especially my personal trainer, and I used to have one, they see, they go, okay, well, you've got 10. Can you do 2 more?
Yes.
Oh, you can do one. You can do 1 more.
Classic.
So what's that about?
That's about knowing your client. Some clients do need to have that little bit of encouragement to do a little bit more. And some of that is useful from a, self-belief, self-efficacy point of view. If you didn't believe you could do those extra 2, but someone encouraged you and supported you to do those extra 2, you walk away, head held high. I didn't know I could do that. And so it's really empowering.
Yeah.
But if that client is exhausted and they come to you and they just drag themselves into the room and say, I've had a heavy day and blah, 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 it's not feeling the energy, you wouldn't ask them to do that. So it's about knowing who you're working with, what their state is, and what their body really needs. and reading the room, reading the person, looking into their eyes and just looking at the body language. What are they telling you? Where are they at? Because not everybody needs that approach, but it's still a useful approach for some.
So we talked about the challenges that we have in the workplace, all the burnout, the stress, and you are there, but you're really not there. And those all are happening right now, I understand, in New Zealand.
Yeah, and I can't remember the stats off the top of my head. The last Southern Cross survey that I was looking at, but I'm fairly sure that the percentage of that presenteeism, they used a different name and I forget what it was, but those stats have increased. So people are turning up, but only in body, not in mind and spirit.
So when you do have those conversations with them, so what's the answer to that? Like, what's the solution?
Engagement first. So engagement, as in the program that I bring, is initially about engagement. It's more about engagement than it is about education to begin with. And I think once you get that engagement, people are more receptive to listening to some of the messages that you want to share that are health related, that are encouraging them to maybe make some changes in their routines. I think that engagement is the test. Once there's always going to be a bell curve in an organization. There's going to be those who are mad keen. There's going to be those who, what are you doing here? Go away. And then everybody in between are the, not sure yet. Let's just wait to see what else he says. And so those are the people in the middle that are the ones that need the focus. Either ends of the bell curve are not worth looking after, but you need to get the major 80% of the organization engaged. So
the ones that are not aware.
Yeah, that's the focus is to get that engagement first, and then once feel like that's people are turning up, they're listening, they're asking questions, they're interested, they're engaging. Right, okay. Well, at least we've got some engagement. Now we can start deploying some of the education.
So what does education look like?
It can be about whatever the organization wants, but when I say wants, probably needs, and part of that information gathering that I talked about at the beginning is finding out what the pain points are in the organization. So after interviewing and surveying the people inside that company, then I can go, well, based on what you've told me, we need to talk about sleep, we need to talk about emotional intelligence, we need to talk about resolving conflict, and we need to talk about nutrition, for example. So it will depend on what comes back.
What do you see the most happen on the ground, like people struggling with the most?
The biggest challenge is time.
Okay.
With any of those things. So you go into an organization and there are things that they're encouraged to change. All they see is more on their list, which means, oh no, what else have I got to do? So it's helping people understand that we're looking for the 1%. We're looking for small things that add up together. And the example I always refer back to is Dave Brailsford, who took charge of the English cycle team around 2000, and he was looking for the marginal gains. So, what can we look at in terms of the pedals? What can we look at in terms of the design of the tires? What can we look at in terms of the drag? What can we look at in terms of the cyclist's sleep? So he was looking for lots of little things rather than we need new bikes. They didn't need new bikes. They just needed lots of little things to add up. And so that's the approach that I take. And that's, therefore, you can pick one small thing this week and maybe next week one other small thing. So they don't ever become insurmountable tasks. They're just, just a couple more glasses of water or just another mouthful of protein, and over time those things add up.
How do you make sure that they're actually doing it? So that's the question, because, 2 more glasses of water every week. How do you know they're doing it?
It's a combination of both support and accountability. That's my role as the health coach, as the coach. So the support is there to help make sure people know what they need to do, but the accountability is making sure they do what they say they're going to do. And so I talked about having the coaching sessions as a follow-up to the education. In those coaching sessions, when people commit to what they're going to do, I'll document that. And then they'll have a place where they can record what they've done. So I'll see their scores and I'll know whether they've, okay, it's a 2 out of 10. How can we make that a 3? Add that extra glass of water. There has to be some personal accountability, right? And that's why the engagement is so important first. If they're engaged, they're more likely to listen to me.
Because this must give you a whole sense of joy and, reward, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And I think
The progress.
that's why I wanted to work in that space, because I can impact more people. So for me, it's about impacting as many people as possible. And working with individual clients is obviously very rewarding too. You're still seeing the change and the progress, but if you can see that on a larger scale, you feel like you're having a bigger impact, which is one of my whys. The health statistics in New Zealand are dreadful. We're the best people at watching sport in the world. We're not participating enough in it. And that's one of the key big levers is moving more as a nation. And so if I can impact some of those people, then I'll feel like I'm winning.
You made a change.
Yeah.
What about exercise? Obviously, as a personal trainer, you obviously you've trained people, you train yourself. There's all these different types of exercise that we do in the gym, at home, and on the streets or in the park. There was a study that has recently been released about 2023, so last year. Talking about the benefits of physical exercise and the different types of exercise affecting our mental health. And in fact, this is something that have been spoken about in the media, like around the world, hundreds of media publications. Can you tell us a bit about what this study is and why is it important?
I think that study was relating to the mental health specifically. And it talked about the intensity. So getting sort of moderate to intense exercise as a part of the mix of exercise that you do during the week. And the reason for that little bit of intensity is because what it encourages the mechanism that drives some of those feel-good hormones in our body and the neurotransmitters. And so when we fire those systems, the brain gets flooded with those. So you've got your endorphins and your serotonin, oxytocin. So when we have those on a regular basis, that helps improve how we feel, about ourselves, but the world as well.
Because, they were looking at it and I just found it so fascinating. They concluded from the study that exercise comes first as a form of treatment for depression, anxiety, and stress. And then you had the cognitive therapy, and then you had the medication.
Yeah, interesting, wasn't it? Interesting order of priority in terms of effectiveness. Yeah. And so I understand from you what you were saying is the high intensity works for depression better. Is that true? Yeah, I think that's what it was saying. So that works for the depression, and so for the anxiety, so more calming activities.
Like Pilates.
Yeah, like my yoga that I was talking about earlier. So I think horses for courses, depending on the particular need of the individual. But, there is some nuance there in terms of what you do, but the overarching message is movement is good for our bodies and we need it. Yeah.
One of the things that I really love about business is the fact that we can have an element of networking and community. See, I don't want to do anything in life that doesn't have community. And I just wanted to share a little happy moment the other day. I joined a new networking program called the Networking Group. The Networking Group is a collection of business owners and entrepreneurs and tradies here in New Zealand. They've got groups all across New Zealand, in Auckland, Christchurch, Hawke's Bay, Tauranga, etc. So the Networking Group, the reason why I joined it is because I'm able to every week have a chance to show up and have a great conversation with at least 5 business owners, get to know who they are, get to know their businesses, and actually find out how can we do business together. If we can't do business together, or if it doesn't work, then they will introduce me to people that they know in their network. Kind of referrals, if you may. So I have loved this experience so far. I think it's been such a great chance to just practice my presentation skills, because you have to get up and talk about your business or talk about what you do. So you have about 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Sometimes they let you do like a minute. So I have joined a group on the shore, and you're welcome to like go to different groups as well, part of your membership. But it helped me to practice my delivery and helped me to share my mission to the world. And I have loved it. It's been such a rewarding experience. And I just wanted to talk about it for a moment and tell you how important it is. And perhaps you might want to check them out. They are called the Networking Group, TNG, and you can find them online. Anyway, back to the episode. When it comes to men's health, from what you see, from your own experience, do you see that men are active? Enough men are active?
No, not enough. I don't think men are quite as good as their female counterparts at thinking about how they can get it into their routines, into their lives. They're very aware they need to, I think, but I don't think there's the next. So they're good at the contemplation, but they're not necessarily good at the action. And I don't know whether that is because they don't know what to do, what is the best thing to do. I think they're probably time-starved as well. But I think where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
And I think, if we don't know what it is that we need to do, there are plenty of people available to help support that. But you've got to take that first step. So I think men know what they need to do, but they're not necessarily good at taking the first step. There are plenty of experts who can help with that, but they need to take that step for themselves and say, hey, look, I need some help.
So what are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
Alertness?
Yeah.
The best thing that you can do is get out into daylight, natural light, first thing in the morning. So there's a couple of things that will happen there. The lux. So lux, photographers know all about lux because it's a measure of light.
It's not the soap, is it?
No, not the soap. Well, it's useful, but
sorry, I just said that.
So indoors, the level of light, even with artificial light, is very, very low. Step outside and the lux, you're talking a difference between sort of hundreds, maybe 1,000 lux to 10 or 100,000 lux. It's a significant difference. And so what it's doing is it's flooding our brains with blue light. So on the light spectrum, blue light is what creates alertness. So we get outside, flood our brains with natural light, and it kind of helps to bookend our day. So it sort of sends a signal to our brain saying, beginning of the day. So your brain then starts counting down 16 hours from there. After about 16 hours, that's when the brain's like, I've had it. It's ready for it's bedtime, basically. And so that helps wash away some of that melatonin. So melatonin being that sleep hormone that will kick in when the cortisol comes down, I've talked about before. And so it helps to get rid of that sleepiness. When sometimes you wake up and you stay indoors, you can sort of still feel a little bit sleepy mid-morning because you haven't got that natural light into the eyes. So that's the first thing to do to boost that alertness is to get outside. First morning cup of tea or cup of coffee or whatever it is, or even breakfast, see if you can do it outside.
What about the simple way to stabilize your blood sugars and you're having constant energy throughout the day?
Yeah, that's something I do bang on about quite a lot, is getting that a consistent level of protein into your diet at the beginning of the day. So that doesn't mean you have to have breakfast. When I say beginning of the day is whenever your first meal is. Some people don't eat breakfast, and that's absolutely fine. Whatever works for them.
Is it okay not to eat breakfast?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Is it okay?
The cereal companies would disagree, but they're the ones that put the message out there that we all need to eat breakfast so they can sell more product.
So the benefits of eating breakfast versus benefits of not eating breakfast?
Depends. I'll usually use body type as an indicator because some body types can go and go and go, whereas mine, I'm one of those sorts of people that struggle to put weight on, whereas there are other people that struggle not to put weight on. They're at the other end of the spectrum. And generally, those who struggle to put weight on need to be eating more consistently, whereas somebody who may be of a body type that can drive past a bakery and put 2 kilos on, which is unfair, but that's how we're all built. They're the people that probably suit fasting or skipping that breakfast meal than others. So it also, again, it depends on the person. So going back to your stable blood sugars, getting a decent amount of protein in that first meal will satiate you for longer. So protein being the driver of that, because it's the most complex macronutrient, so it takes longer for your body to digest it. And so the longer that takes, the longer your body's working on that digestive process and slowly but surely feeding that food into your system as energy, breaking it down and using it as energy. And the longer that takes, the longer the tail from that meal in terms of stable blood sugars. So if you can run that into the rest of your day by lunchtime, and you haven't probably needed a snack, you'll have a nutritious lunch. Do the same again. That takes you to dinner. You haven't snacked between meals. You don't need to, ideally, but it depends what components there are in those meals as to whether you get to a point where you got the 3 o'clock lull and you're starving and you haven't necessarily eaten the right things earlier.
Why do we get the 3 o'clock lull?
There's a couple of different components to it. One is you've had lunch, your blood sugars have gone up, which happens every meal, regardless of what you eat. It depends, it can go higher if you eat a high carbohydrate type meal. Then it drops off. It will slowly stabilize again, but generally it will go depending on the high. So the higher the high, the lower the low that follows. And then when it gets to a point where it's quite low, your brain will start going, hello, we need some fuel here. But there'll be a lull. There'll be that, I'm just going to have a little nap. And that's around that 3 o'clock time, because that's the time it takes for you to get to that point. So that's one of the drivers. The other is dehydration. We may not have been drinking enough water from the beginning of the day. So by the time you get to about then, not only are the blood sugars quite low, the hydration levels may be below optimum, and that combination is not great. So it's a two-pronged, at least a two-pronged thing.
Well, how about the whole fasting, the intermittent fasting, and not eating at all? And what's going on here? Is it okay? Is it healthy to do that? I mean, some people can't be doing that because they are on medications. They're diabetics.
Yep.
But for people who are able to do that, how is it helpful for them?
There's a number of ways of looking at it, but one of the ways is that by removing, let's say it's breakfast and you just have lunch and dinner, you're immediately removing a whole bunch of calories out of your day. So if one of the goals of that person is to lose weight, then that could be a way of doing it for them. It's a bit more black and white, as opposed to going, I need to reduce my calories each meal, or just take a meal out and eat 2 other normal meals. So it can be a useful tool. The other thing that it's doing is it's improving your insulin sensitivity. By not eating for a longer period of time, your insulin sensitivity improves, which means when you do eat, you don't need as much insulin in your system to bring your blood sugars back down to a safe level. And if you go for long enough, you go into what's called ketosis. So instead of using glucose as the preferred fuel in your body and your brain, you use ketones, which is, I've forgotten the name for it because I'm on camera, but it will probably pop into my head later. But when you're using ketones as the alternative fuel, and if you think of the body as like a hybrid car, you can either use petrol or electricity to drive the car. You can either use glucose or ketones for fueling, using it as a fuel for the body. So if you go into ketosis, you've exhausted your stores of glucose and glycogen in the liver to the point where you've got none left, and so your body switches over. And people report having high levels of clarity, so their thinking is clearer. And that kind of makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. If we've gone into ketosis because food is scarce, that's the time where we need to be our sharpest, because we're looking for that next meal. Otherwise, we're not going to survive. So from an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense that our thinking would be sharper and our actions would be clearer. So that's the other benefit, that that insulin sensitivity, plus the calorie saving. So those are a couple of the benefits.
What about sleep? We talked a lot about sleep, and if you were thinking about sleep rituals and what are the things that you can do that will help pay you back What sort of advice do you have for people who are trying to get a good night's sleep and they're struggling a little?
Yeah, great question. The question that comes up, and the bit that I emphasize when I'm talking about it, is this transition between transition between evening and sleep time, or between work and sleep. So what are we doing? So typically our 24 hours is 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of me time. But the me time gets eaten into, probably by work and a whole bunch of other things that keep us busy, not at work, but probably at home or between work and home.
Yeah.
And so it gets eroded. And that's the bit that I bang on about quite a lot, because it's that transition between the all the thinking and doing of work and the need to be calm and dialing down the nervous system so that we can fall asleep and stay asleep. And often we may be able to fall asleep. That might mean a couple of drinks, which probably isn't ideal. When I say drinks, I mean alcoholic drinks, because that will disrupt our sleep, but it helps us fall asleep. So I wouldn't encourage people to use alcohol, but find ways to make that transition from the high stimulation of work and the need to be really quite calm and dialed down to fall asleep and stay asleep. So it's that me time that's getting squeezed is the thing I focus on.
How can you do that practically?
I always like to use the example of children for usually there's a lot of parents in the room when I'm talking, and they can identify what this means. So what we did, I'm a parent, and one of the things that we did with our kids is finding a routine, from birth to going to school, those first few years, getting into a routine so that they've had their meal, they've had a bath, they've had a bottle of milk, they've had a story read to them, and then it's sleep time. So their brain sees this pattern, those things I just described, and each night that happens, the brain's, we're getting ready for sleep, getting ready for sleep. We stop doing that as adults, generally. So it's looking for what are those activities that you need to do to get yourself into a more dialed down state. And Netflix, it hasn't helped, because you'll put it on and it will immediately flick to the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. And I remember reading a quote from the CEO of Netflix saying that his biggest competitor was sleep. None of the other platforms sleep. So what do we need to do? Maybe we need to say, we'll only watch one episode tonight. Stop it. Go to bed and read, or do some yoga, or do some meditation, or do anything that will dial down the nervous system.
Well, that's the whole conversation by itself, because it's the discipline to not keep going and watching, including me. I struggle with being disciplined to stop watching Friends, and I keep watching the episode after episode after episode, because it's mindless, it's funny, I'm escaping, I'm relaxing, and I just really I sometimes just want to fall asleep in front of the TV. I just wonder why do we do that? Like, why do we just want to, why is it so hard to stop watching TV?
Those platforms, just like social media, they want us to consume, right? So we are the product if we're consuming. And it's not easy. It's not easy. That me time that I talked about, Netflix is part of the challenge.
Yeah.
And it's not something that comes easily to anybody, and it's not something that you can just switch to. I think it's going back to the 1%ers. So, 15 minutes of sleep, extra sleep on top of what you normally get per night times 7 days would make a significant difference to your health. So how could you allow yourself those extra 15 minutes? In other words, one episode, half an hour of reading a book, drop off to sleep. Now, that's different for everyone. When they start and when they stop, different bedtimes, different people, different chronotypes. Some people are morning people, some people are evening people. So it's different for everybody. You can't blanket everyone with one technique, but you just got to have the intention. And I think everybody in the household has got to kind of be on the same page to an extent. different bedtimes. There's the disruption that isn't going to work necessarily very easily. But I think, if it's something that if people are struggling with their energy, it's a place to look. Even 5 minutes, 5 times 7 days, just 5 minutes. That's an extra 35 minutes of sleep in a week. So I'm not saying you need to make some, drastic big changes, but just look for the little opportunities and just stack them.
You must find so much, I was going to say, like, just, going back to the organizations when you go and talk to people, you probably have found that the struggle for employers and maybe employees more, is that knowing the expectation from them, what are they supposed to give to the employer, and what is the balance between their self-care and what they're supposed to give to their job. I think we talked about that in terms of, talking about what else we can talk about as the finding that balance between what's required in the workplace and what other responsibilities for the rest of your life, keeping those in check.
Yeah.
It's a note that I wrote in my notes here.
Yeah.
So what can you speak into that for us?
If you look at somebody's contract that's very specific about what the organisation wants from that person, there'll be the legalese, then there'll be the appendix of expectations or duties, and then there'll probably be one line at the bottom that says, or any other reasonable requests from memory. And any other reasonable requests is really an opportunity for organisations to ask anyone to do anything, but obviously it has to be reasonable. I think depending on the culture in the organisation, if they bring an outsider into, like myself, to do what I do, there's always, like I said, there was that bell curve, right? So people sometimes may be resentful. Why do we need to participate in this? I'm here to just do my job. I think if the culture is at a stage where it's seen as a normal thing, this is the way we do things around here, participate because we'd like you to. It's always optional. You can't force somebody to do those things. But I think when they see their colleagues doing it and they see the benefit that their colleagues are getting from it, then the naysayers will probably eventually go, okay, and I'll give him a chance. Yeah. So it's a fine line between, what's expected and what happens anyway, because this is the way we do things around here in the culture. And I think that's part of my role, I see, as helping improve that culture if it needs to, so that it is a place where people want to do those things, and it's not just, beers after work on a Friday afternoon. That's the classic sort of Kiwi way of doing things. And I think you can do a whole lot better than that. That's a great thing in terms of bringing people together, but it shouldn't always be alcohol that drives those activities, I don't believe. There are organisations I've read about that have banned alcohol in their team activities because it excluded certain people. And so they said, right, no alcohol, and then everybody can participate and join in, and that's off the table. So it's up to organisations to look at how they get their teams to engage so that everybody's included. It's an inclusive way of doing things. Yeah. And then people are more willing to do the extra, this, the that, beyond what's in their job description.
So if someone who's, their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, and they're trying to get healthy, they haven't got a personal trainer or a health coach, and certainly their workplace isn't providing them with these luxuries, because to some extent it can be a luxury to have someone like yourself come in and do those courses. But what the hope is that it doesn't become a luxury, that it becomes part of every organization.
Absolutely.
And it's the norm rather than it's just it's nice to have, it's a must have. But if they don't have any of that stuff, what are the first things that they can do to assess themselves, to see the health check? How do I know that I'm not okay? And then what can I do about it? But I want to know from you, what is the health check? Like, lay it out for us, for those people.
I think the first thing for people to do, if they're going to be proactive with their health, is to probably go and see their doctor and ask for a whole set of bloods, comprehensive blood panel. Because health generally starts on the inside. So people who've got bad skin have got something going on with their gut, probably. So get the gut right first, then look at how the skin's looking. So the comprehensive blood panel is a great way of understanding what's going on inside. And are any of those bloods outside of the medical range? So when I'm looking at them, I'm looking at a much narrower range. So if that's the medical range, I'm looking at this range. So there's a gap there between where my numbers stop and where the medical numbers stop. And that's the area where people went to their doctor because they're not feeling great, but the doctor goes, oh, it's not outside the range, so you're okay. And they're like, hang on a minute, but I came to see you because I'm not feeling 100 or something's not right. So that would be the first port of call. And then I would look at things like diet and how much activity they're getting in their week. So step count is a really simple way of doing that. How many steps are you getting done every day? Because ideally, and the 10,000 steps is a misnomer, that isn't accurate. The science says it's somewhere between about 7,000 and 8,000. So if you're hitting 7,500, 8,000, that would be a good step count. So that's that general activity. It's not exercise. It's just general movement. And then diet. So a great way of identifying where your diet's at is use a tracker. So keep track of what you're eating for a week or 2 weeks. The tracker will identify what you should be consuming in terms of volume of calories. And I'm not advocating counting calories. I don't think it's the answer, but it's a way of getting an insight into where you're at. And then you can get that. It builds that self-awareness, right? Oh, okay, I'm 1,000 over what it thinks. Where do I need to? And you go back through and you go, oh, I could have probably had the chocolate cake, or I could have probably had one glass of wine, and you can refine what you're doing. And I think those three things, the bloods, the step counts, and the food diary, are a really great place to start.
Or like while you were talking, I was thinking this takes time. Obviously, that you need to have that perspective, like sitting down and actually reflecting and writing, maybe like writing in a journal, recording what you've been doing. Yes, this takes time and investment, but it's going to add a lot of value to you in the long term as a healthy person, as a healthy human at your work. So it does pay. I do have a lot of questions for you. I am conscious of time. We can talk about this forever. But in terms of your, I want to touch on the business aspect because this is part of the work that you do. What's it been like running your own health coaching practice as an entrepreneur? How have you been able to make it what it is today?
Ups and downs, like any business. Ups and downs, particularly in the last 4 years, with what happened prior to don't like using the C word, but you know what I'm talking about. And that was challenging because I was very much a contact business, whether it was individuals or organizations. And I was working with Harcourts over that period, and it was stop-start the whole time. Painful. So there was very little continuity. And it came with its challenges, both, financially and sort of psychologically, when you can't do what you want to do because there are bigger factors influencing your business, it becomes frustrating. But I think, adapting to the environment you find yourself in. So I was doing a lot more online work, and look, I know most businesses are the same. They've done a lot more work online, and Zoom has become a thing. It's a generic now. And so I do a bit of coaching online still. I have programs that are online that I created in those years, and I'm still doing. I'm building up an enormous library of work, which when I stop doing it, it will be really useful to refer to and share with people. And so there's some good things that have come out of the last few years. But it's who you know. I think it's fair to say that the work that's come my way has been because I've come across the right person, either networking or via someone else networking, or through social events, and that's really what's driven the business for me. Yeah.
How has it impacted you when it was around the lockdown days and things like that? How could you describe that time?
Yeah, it was definitely frustrating. I remember clearly running a course. One of the things that I do with a couple of colleagues, or was doing with a couple of colleagues, was education course for PTs. So it was a Friday afternoon, Saturday and Sunday. So about 2.5 days of constant education, and quite a big weekend. And I think we'd got to the Saturday night. So we'd done the Friday afternoon, we'd done the full Saturday, and then we were a lockdown was announced Saturday night for Sunday morning. So literally in the middle of this course, they couldn't come back and do the Sunday. We're like, what? So that was that was a classic example. Now we got that done, but we had to tune in on Zoom and do the Sunday via Zoom remotely, which isn't ideal in a course where it's quite hands-on learning. So yeah, lots of frustration, but I think people also were looking for support. You know, when we were isolated, when we were locked down, that human connection was really important, even if it was virtual. So I was running classes online that engaged people. I just put it out there. There's my Zoom code. I'll be online at this, and this. Join in. And, you know, a lot of people I knew were jumping on, but there were a few people I didn't. And there were quite a few organizations, a couple of organizations that I worked with over those lockdowns as well, where for them it was a way of engaging with the rest of their team who were at home. And partly was I sort of mixed a movement session with an education session. So I'd drop in a little bit of wisdom at the beginning and people could ask questions and try and understand more of what I was talking about. And then we'd stop and do some movement as a group. And that was a great way for them to start their day, but also see each other that wasn't work related. So there was some positives in there too.
And what's this is a question I like to ask my guests is if I flip onto your diary right now, your notes, what would I find?
You'd find a notepad just like yours with different people's names at the top and lots of notes underneath that I've done some research on different people. So that notepad is from a podcast that I do actually, where I interview people in the industry and ask them to give me their tips, and the tips are the juice, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's in my notepad. In my diary, I use an electronic one, so there isn't anything written down for my calendar, my diary. And I have color-coded appointments in my calendar, and each color represents a different activity, so I know what my week looks like. One of the tasks that our coaching group did was mapping out our perfect week. So whatever we were doing now, you map out what you would like your ideal week to look like, and it could take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to get there. But having done that exercise, your brain has seen that. And it slowly helps you engineer your week towards the perfect week. So that might be, you know, I don't see clients before a certain time, or I only see clients in this block. There's this time for me, there's that time for research, there's that time for admin, whatever the perfect week looks like. And that was a brilliant exercise because it helps you feel like you're in control of your day, your week, your month, your year, as opposed to just responding to all the demands that, you know, come at you. So it's something I'd recommend people do. It's a simple spreadsheet, Monday to Friday or whatever days you work, times down the other side, and then just start blocking color activities or words, whatever works for you. And that's a great way of taking control of your life, really, because what your day looks like is what your life looks like.
Well, I like the word block out because I wonder why sometimes I don't have time to do things for myself. And that's because it's not been blocked out.
Yep, there you go.
If it's not in a diary, it's not happening.
Exactly, pretty much. Exactly. That's how mine works. Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been amazing to have you. You are a wealth of knowledge, and your expertise is so high in demand right now. And I can, you know, tell you that I've been inspired by the conversation today and the fact that you are so passionate and keen to see people become who they're supposed to be. And I, you know, cannot wait to see how you will grow and flourish in terms of being a health coach, a mindset coach. More and more companies will be able to flip the switch on that and have people like yourself make a huge impact in their organizations and their employees.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.